In the summer of 1943, the city of Hamburg slept beneath a sky heavy with secrets. Beneath its calm streets, life carried on as usual, trams rattling through cobblestone roads, factory whistles echoing across the Elbe, and families gathered around dim radios whispering of faraway battles. But above those same skies, thousands of men were preparing to bring hell to earth. This is the story of a plan so devastating that it would change the very nature of warfare. A plan that would turn night into day and a city into a furnace. This was Operation Gomorrah. The target. By 1943, the Second World War had reached its fevered midpoint. Across Europe, cities lay in ruins. Warsaw, Rotterdam, Coventry, all scarred by the brutality of total war. But Germany still stood tall, its industries humming, its armies marching, and Hamburg, the jewel of northern Germany, was one of the pillars holding up Hitler's war machine. A vast port city on the river Elbe, its docks built U-boats that hunted Allied convoys. Its refineries produced fuel for tanks and aircraft. Its factories turned out the weapons of conquest, artillery, bullets, engines, and the endless stream of supplies feeding the front lines. To the Allied planners, Hamburg was not just a city. It was a symbol of German industrial might, and it had to burn. At RAF Bomber Command Headquarters in High Wycombe, the architects of destruction began to sketch their masterpiece. The operation would not be a single raid, but a relentless sequence. A week of fire, steel, and smoke. It would test every advance the Allies had achieved in aerial warfare. At its helm stood Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Bomber Harris, the man who believed that bombing could break the enemy's spirit. To Harris, cities were the lungs of war. Destroy the lungs, and the body suffocates. But Hamburg would prove that sometimes, in trying to end a war, humanity could ignite something far darker. The breakthrough. In the summer of 1943, Allied scientists unveiled a secret that would forever tilt the balance of the air war. Window. It was a simple trick. Thin strips of aluminum foil cut to a precise length. Dropped from bombers, the strips reflected radar signals, creating a blizzard of false echoes. German radar screens would be blinded, their night fighters chasing ghosts. Operation Gomorrah would be the first time this new weapon was unleashed. It was a gamble, and the men who flew that night would stake their lives on its success. On the evening of July 24, 1943, the first wave of bombers rumbled down the runways of England. 744 aircraft took off. Lancasters, Halifaxes, and Stirlings. Black silhouettes against the fading light. Each carried tons of explosives, incendiaries, and the promise of destruction. As the formation crossed the North Sea, the German radar network in Northern Europe lit up, only to go blind moments later. Their screens filled with static, hundreds of phantom targets. Window had worked. By midnight, the first bombers reached Hamburg. Section 3. The First Night. At 12:57 a.m., the first Pathfinders arrived over the city. They dropped flares, bright green and red markers, illuminating the target zones below. Moments later, the main force descended. Bomb bay doors opened. The first explosions tore through the night, lighting up the city like a storm of suns. High explosive bombs shattered roofs and streets, breaking open gas mains and water pipes. They were the hammer blows, designed not to kill, but to prepare. Then came the fire. Tens of thousands of incendiaries followed, magnesium, phosphorus, and napalm.
They fell like rain, bursting into white-hot fire wherever they touched. Wood, paper, cloth, everything caught. Houses became torches, streets turned into rivers of flame. The people of Hamburg had endured raids before. They knew to take shelter, in basements, in cellars, in bunkers built of concrete and fear. But that night, the fire found them all. The heat was so intense that the air itself seemed to scream. Outside, the wind began to rise, pulled toward the growing inferno. Inside the shelters, oxygen vanished. People clawed at walls, gasping for air that no longer existed. In some neighborhoods, entire families suffocated before the flames reached them. In others, those who fled found themselves trapped, the streets blocked by collapsing buildings, the fire roaring from every direction. It was the first taste of what would become known as the firestorm. Section 4. The Fire Awakens. The first night had stunned the Germans, but it was only the beginning. On the following nights, the Allies returned. The Americans joined in daylight raids targeting shipyards and oil refineries. At night, the RAF continued their assault. By July 27th, the air raids had created a perfect storm. A city already wounded, its firefighting systems destroyed, its people exhausted. And then the weather turned. A dry, hot wind blew across the region, feeding the flames. That night, the RAF sent more than 700 bombers. It was the fourth raid, the one that would make history.
As the first waves arrived, Pathfinder crews marked the target area again, but this time the markers fell slightly off-center, directly over the densely populated eastern districts of Hamburg. Within minutes, the entire quarter was ablaze. The fire spread faster than anyone had imagined possible. Each burning building fed the next. Soon, the conflagration merged into one vast inferno stretching miles across. The heat rose to unimaginable levels, over 800 degrees Celsius. It sucked in air from the surrounding countryside at hurricane force. Witnesses described a howling wind that lifted people off their feet and hurled them into the flames. Trees were uprooted, asphalt melted beneath fleeing crowds. The sky turned crimson, glowing as if the heavens themselves were on fire. Eyewitnesses would later recall how birds burst into flame mid-flight, how rivers boiled, how iron railings twisted like soft clay. And beneath it all, the sound. Not of bombs or engines, but a steady, monstrous roar. The sound of the fire breathing. V. Inside the inferno. In the shelters, people waited, not knowing that the air outside had turned to poison. The firestorm devoured oxygen so completely that many died where they sat, without ever seeing the flames. Others tried to escape. They opened the shelter doors and were met with a blast of heat so intense it stripped the skin from their bodies. Those who made it into the streets found themselves in a nightmare beyond comprehension. Everywhere, fire. Roofs collapsing, explosions of gas tanks. And above, the wind screaming like a living creature. Some witnesses described how the storm pulled them along the streets, dragging them towards the center of the blaze. Mothers lost hold of their children. Men crawled along the ground, trying to breathe the thin layer of cooler air near the pavement. But the fire was merciless. One woman later recalled seeing the silhouettes of hundreds of people running, all in the same direction, before the wall of flame swallowed them whole. By dawn, the firestorm had burned itself out, but the city had ceased to exist. 6th, the morning after.
When daylight came, the true horror revealed itself. Entire neighborhoods were gone, nothing left but ashes and chimneys. Streets had melted together, forming black rivers of tar and metal. Thousands lay dead, unrecognizable, their bodies turned to dust or fused into the ground. The smell, a mixture of smoke, burned flesh, and chemicals, hung in the air for weeks. The survivors wandered in silence, clutching whatever remained, a photograph, a child's toy, a memory of a life that no longer existed. Official estimates would later record over 40,000 people killed in that single week, but those who lived through it swore the number was far higher. The destruction was so complete that even Nazi officials were shaken. Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Hamburg is dead. The devastation is beyond all imagination." For the first time, the German people felt what they had once inflicted on others. And yet, the war raged on. Seventh, the aftermath. In London, news of the raid brought celebration. For the first time, Bomber Command had proven that it could strike deep inside Germany with devastating effect. The success of Window was heralded as a turning point. Air Chief Marshal Harris called it proof that bombing could break the enemy's morale. But for the crews who had flown the mission, the victory felt hollow. They had seen the fires from miles away, glowing even as they turned for home. Some described the sight as beautiful, others as terrifying. A few never spoke of it again. In Hamburg, recovery was slow and painful. Nearly 1 million people fled the city in the weeks that followed, turning roads and railways into rivers of refugees. The once proud industrial heart of Germany had become a graveyard. And yet, from the ashes, life would return. By the following winter, trains were running again. The survivors began to rebuild, brick by brick, hand by hand. Eighth, the legacy of fire.
Operation Gomorrah marked a new chapter in the history of warfare. It was the first true demonstration of the firestorm, a phenomenon that would later visit Dresden, Tokyo, and other cities in flames. It showed the world that technology could make destruction almost limitless, and it forced humanity to question whether such power could ever be used justly. In the years that followed, the ruins of Hamburg stood as both a warning and a testament. A warning of what total war could unleash, a testament to resilience, to a people who rebuilt from nothing. Today, modern Hamburg rises high above the river once again, its skyline a mixture of glass and steel. But beneath the surface, the scars remain. Old air raid shelters still lie buried beneath the streets. In some basements, the walls are still blackened by the smoke of that terrible week in 1943. 9. Reflections. Looking back, historians still debate the morality of Operation Gomorrah. Did it hasten the end of the war? Did it save lives by breaking Germany's capacity to fight? Or did it simply trade one horror for another? The answers are not simple. For the people of Hamburg, the bombing was not strategy, it was survival, terror, and loss. For the air crews, it was duty, executed with precision and courage under unimaginable conditions. For the world, it was a glimpse into the future, a future where war could burn entire cities in a single night. And perhaps, most tragically of all, it was a foreshadowing, because 2 years later, on the other side of the world, the same science that created the firestorm over Hamburg would give birth to something even worse, the atomic fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Operation Gomorrah had opened a door humanity could never close again. 10. The final fire. Decades later, survivors would still remember the sound. that deep rolling roar as the fire consumed their world. They would speak of the heat, the wind, the impossible brightness of the night sky, and they would wonder how anyone could survive it. Some did. They told their stories in whispers, of families lost, of miracles amid ruin, of how in the heart of hell people still helped each other. One woman remembered how strangers carried her out of the rubble when she could no longer walk. Another told how as the firestorm raged, a small group hid in a flooded basement, the water saving them when the world above turned to flame. These stories, too, are part of Operation Gomorrah, not of destruction, but of endurance. 11. The memory. Today in Hamburg, memorials stand where neighborhoods once burned. Simple stones engraved with names long forgotten by most of the world. Every July, candles flicker in the night, their flames soft against the modern skyline. And in those moments, the past feels close again, as if the air still remembers. Because Operation Gomorrah was not just an attack on a city. It was a moment when humanity crossed a line, when the sky itself became a weapon. 12. Epilogue. The Allies called it a success. The Germans called it terror. History calls it both. But for those who were there, in the plains above or in the cellars below, it was simply fire. An all-consuming, merciless fire that left nothing untouched. And in that fire, the world saw its own reflection, capable of brilliance, precision, and horror beyond imagination. Operation Gomorrah stands as a chapter in history that must never be forgotten, not for its triumph, but for its tragedy, a reminder that even the noblest cause can be scorched by the flames it unleashes. When the firestorm over Hamburg finally died, it left behind a silence deeper than any bomb could make, a silence filled with questions we still ask today. What is victory if it comes at such a cost? And who, in the end, truly wins when the whole world burns? They called it Operation Gomorrah, the night the heavens opened and a city was consumed by its own fire, a night when war reached its fiercest and humanity stood at the edge of the flame, forever changed by what it saw in the fire.